Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. So I'm doing a TurfStream tonight. I'm chatting with some of the lads. I have last true Gael on with me, and I have Gauva on with me. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Gauva. It depends on where you're from, in the country, how you say that. But Oscuelga, Gauva Gael. So thanks for joining me, lads. Cheers, boys.
Good to be here.
Cheers. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, nice one. And I want to start with you, Gauva. You were talking about you were going to do a stream on amalgamating parties.
Yeah,
it's something.
It's been something that's been kind of cropping up now and again, like since the election, especially. And I kind of sat down to do like a pre-prepared video about it, but it's one of those things. There's so many, paths and permutations and all that it could take that it would just kind of seem. It was just, I don't know. It just seemed like it wouldn't be really worthwhile doing, But I was just trying to put together to try and get the pros and cons together on one video. Like it'd nearly be better just to kind of ramble through it, But it's just something. It's just something I've been hearing from certain people from the time of the election, and it's kind of like it's not really workable, like in my opinion. So I'm just kind of sick of hearing about it. Tell you the truth,
Okay, so it's people were. So you've been hearing about it. Do you think a lot of people are saying that? A lot of people are suggesting that? Because since the election, I haven't heard too much myself. But do you think people want amalgamation?
It's just certain sections, and it's kind of like it's like a tripartisan movement. That was the name of the stream I was going to do then afterwards. But it's I kind of like the idea that we can kind of bring everyone onto the same page, but even if that means that there's going to be different tents, I'm not a big tent nationalist. I think that there is room for, the National Party, or IFP or whoever, can go after their core vote if you want, because there is enough of a difference there that, we don't have to be fighting each other over, bits of Fianna Fáil or, scraps of different parties, if they have an idea, go for it. Go after your audience, or your voter base. But there's no point us crowding each other. If someone is economically right wing, grand, go after Fine Gael, start going after them. If someone else is, say, involved heavily in farming or whatever, go after the Green Party. If someone else, Fianna Fáil, and any of these groups, there's no point crowding each other out. That's just my opinion.
It kind of raises the question with these nationalist populist parties or whatever you call them, of between all these different parties who are different, and even not even parties, just people with different ideas and stuff. What is is there because the way people describe it is well, we all agree on the obvious things, but we have disagreements. What are the obvious things? I mean, is it just immigration? Is it that simple? What do you think, Last True Gael, would be the fundamental essence of what supposedly unites all these supposedly parties that supposedly have stuff in common? What actually is it?
Well, I suppose the underlying thread, I suppose immigration would be kind of one of them, but the other one would be a sort of sovereignty, I suppose, or in that the way that the National Party will kind of have a focus about talking about the role of international finance capital on Ireland, and then the Irish Freedom Party would probably talk more about the fact that you have the European Union basically imposing all these kind of restrictions on us, telling us a lot what to do, that kind of thing. So it's an amalgamation of those kind of things whereby I don't know what would Gava or Gower think of that.
Yeah, it's kind of saying AFP or whatever. I always knew them at the beginning as Irexit, and even now that's fallen kind of to the wayside. I'm not even sure what their policy is anymore. Even the National Party would have a clear European policy, but maybe I'm just out of the loop or something with Irexit. But they're not even Irexit anymore, are they? It's just kind of a case that we are a disparate group, like even as nationalists, like we're coming from all walks, you know, like even things like say like agricultural policy or anything like that. Like that'd be kind of a big thing for me. Like, but like I've talked to before I joined any of them. You know, I chatted to the members and I chatted to whoever, like you know, whoever would talk to me about it, and there was even the mentality, you know, of the members that have joined the different groups. There's a kind of a culture building within the groups already, you know, and like the idea, like I think what's going to happen eventually is that the strength that we have is that we have the ability to debate each other and to talk about these things, whereas there are some things then say in the traditional political scheme that are just completely off limits, that there is no, you know, it's completely dogmatic, like you can't have any dissent on certain issues, you know, so that's our strength, like, but you know, there is a place for us debating each other and talking about this, but you know, it's just to kind of bring everyone on the same page, but not creating a kind of a dogma about things, you know, like that would be my whole.
Yeah, like one of my things for anyone, you know, with all the like people have different points of view, but one of my big things is just, you know, short of someone committing a crime, if someone's committing a crime or something like that, right, which, you know, people don't, but if someone were or doing something completely preposterous, you could disavow someone then. But aside from that, in terms of the ideological realm, don't disavow anyone. I think it's one of the most poisonous things on the right in Ireland, around the world, since like World War II, really, is people constantly just trying to hang the fella to their right, or, you know, say, oh, well, he's too much for me. And I actually spoke to someone recently, a friend of mine, who, and this is all due respect if he's listening or whatever, it's like not I'm not like picking on him. It's just it's a thing a lot of people would say to me. He's not like a nationalist involved person. He kind of just, you know, these people who are like, they're not totally into it or anything like that, but they can see that you have a point. They can see where you're coming from, and they do agree that there are some alarming trends, etc. You know, he's kind of on that level, and he was saying he was trying to point it out to me that like maybe it's important to distance yourself from some of the radical elements and stuff like that. And to, what was the other thing? To kind of rein in your discourse and to that kind of thing. And I was trying to say, like, you know, and I don't mean this in a condescending way, but I was trying to say, listen, you know, and this does sound condescending, but I was like, I once believed that too. But sorry, everybody, both audience and to my two guests, so I'm rambling here, but you know, like, there's a reason why you can't do that. You know, it's if you just look at the left, anywhere from the center liberal left to the far left, find me a single disavowal. Or where someone who's in the center mainstream left, you know, they will often quote articles and support activists who are crazy far out on the left, who are borderline Antifa, who basically advocate almost openly for violence. They won't say, well, I wouldn't associate with him. If you know, if they cross paths, and if there's an issue, if that person on the far wild left has an article up or has made a video, you know, the person in the center left won't ignore it. And I was just trying to say, like, I was just trying to explain, because they were like, if you cut off the wilder people to your right, you'd be grand. You'd have a great point. You'd have a perfect package there. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand that there's a cost to that. So that's one of my things, is like, whether it's our exit, whether it's John McGurk, whether it's whoever, is like, and you know, we could talk about all that, but I'm always pleading with people to, like, please don't do it. You are like, the only reason you're doing it is to operate on the frame of your enemies. Please don't do it, you know. But so that's one of my things, is like, I don't mind our exit, and not that it's my business, but, you know, our exit and National Party having a disagreement on a policy or something like that, that's fine. But one of them pointing to the other and saying they're the real bad guys, or the other one is the real bad guys, that, to me, that's the only taboo I have. If people disagree, I'm like, all good, not my business. It's when people start trying to appeal to the center and the left by highlighting the other person, is when I'm like, that's basically my only, like, house rule, where I'm like, the only way, insofar as I matter at all, that you could piss me off is to do that. I mean, what do you make of that last true, Gael? Do you know, do you think it's a problem? we have.
Yeah, there's a couple of really good comments in there. There's one comment I just kind of want to talk about there. Gael, Irish Nationalism says these lads haven't involved campaigns at a high level. Otherwise, they would understand that the logistical problem is more important than focusing on ideological differences. And to be fair, there's actually a bit of truth to that, because one of the things is I was taking a look at them. So if you go on data.gov.ie, they have all the kind of breakdown of the different votes per candidate, per constituency. And if you take a look at that, in the last election, the Irish sort of, nationalist side got an average controlled for candidate of about 500 votes. And roughly speaking, per constituency, 40 constituencies, you're going to need to increase that by a factor of 10. And when I was, talking to people about this back in January, one thing I kind of found was that, like, exactly like you were saying there, like, there's an awful lot of people who, they're not like heavily into this stuff or anything like that, but they can realize that, if you bring up something like increased people means you pay way more for rent, they'll react positively to that. But one of the problems that they had, or they were having, was the fact that, like, they just didn't know or recognize who you're talking about. And not only is they're kind of like, well, I don't know that person in the community, but there's also the fact that, like, people don't want to be seen for voting for something that no one's heard of, or they say it like in the pub, and like, who are those guys? Why are you voting for them? And because of that, the next issue that comes into it is, say, canvassing per local area. So you'll have to take a look at the constituency breakdown, where all the households are, all that kind of thing. And I actually think I remember Gael was talking about this in one of his streams, that, like, about the number of people that was helping kind of people candidates canvass. And I was kind of doing some of the numbers in my head, and I was thinking, okay, like, so if you have like a certain number and you need to increase your vote by a factor of 10, and if you can just get that kind of message out, then logistics do increasingly become an important thing, because then you have to kind of think about, like, where are the areas within the constituency where the most traffic kind of comes through, where can you get your message across? Because I think right now one problem we have is that we're simply not as well known, and we can see it, like how RT and the media have acted in the past while. They've done stuff like they haven't they didn't talk about Varadkar in the park. They didn't talk about the incident in Carrigaline. They haven't talked about the association that Roderick O'Gorman has had. They're not going to, and that's what actually makes that the new nationalists primetime thing even more remarkable, because that was essentially free publicity. But one big problem is that, like, I mean, you said it before, and Gara said it before, that, like, the stuff we're talking about would have been perfectly acceptable to the average Irish person like 10 years ago, 20 years ago at most, So the idea is just to get people to just know about what's there, basically.
Yeah. That's like banging your head off a brick wall. It's a tough problem, that, isn't it? I just want to ask you though as well, lads. Did you read the John McGurk article? Because I haven't. I skimmed over the headline on Roderick O'Gorman, because you mentioned Roderick O'Gorman there. Have any of you read that? None of us did we?
No, I didn't read it.
I wouldn't bother with him.
But like, I'm actually going to look it up as we talk, because like, so Gripped Media, because he put out an article, obviously saying that, like, what was the gist of it? It was something like you have to be reasonable, and it's something about it being unreasonable to come at.
I seen he made a comment about that you couldn't link Roderick O'Gorman and apart from a photograph they had together. But there was a tweet that I seen that Roderick O'Gorman sent. I don't know if was that doctored or what. Like, but there was a tweet from Roderick O'Gorman. Real. Yeah, like, there you go. Like, what he was giving him compliments in a tweet of a photo of the two of them together about his activism. Like, I don't know how clear cut you need to make it. Like, McGurk, like, we've moved on, I think, at this stage. Like, he was even
but it's like, okay, so
on the new national,
but like, for example,
like, sorry, go on ahead.
But like, No, I'm cutting across you. Sorry, but like, you know, if I don't know, some center, let's say Ain 2 came into power and whatever his name is became the minister for whatever, and there was a picture surfaced of him from a year or two ago, tweeting out that like delighted to be here at the Paddy's Day parade with Nick Griffin. You know, it's like, well, obviously, you know what would happen there. Like, it's not like people would go, look, he just met the guy one day and put up a tweet and said, great to be here, shaking hands, carrying a banner with him. It's hardly a big deal. Like, someone like McGurk knows that that's not true, right? And then it's a question of, he would go, well, that's not the same thing. And it's like, okay, so are you saying it's worse that Nick Griffin is quote unquote racist and this and that or whatever? Are you saying that that's worse than advocating for saying that 9-year-olds enjoy sex and etc.? Like, objectively, it's, you know, Thatchell is quote unquote again as bad or worse, whatever, according to a mainstream narrative. Even to a normie, they would go, that's worse. The Thatchell thing is actually weirder. So it's like, there's no argument for why you wouldn't hammer on that. Like, for someone like McGurk, it's like, why wouldn't you hammer on that point, grab onto it like a pit bull and shake it till its very last? Like, you know, I don't know. It's McGurk. I'm falling for McGurk again. You know, I'm being silly, really. But it's like, you know, this is like, and that's the problem. Like, McGurk has his better moments, but it's like people like him were running can you believe it? People like him were running the so-called right wing up until like we came along, like streamers and kind of the new National Party and all that stuff. Before that, it was like John McGurk and people like him. It's insane that it was being led like that. It absolutely boggles my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing with that too is that, I mean, this is the other thing with Roger O'Gorman is that like there was an article and I think from the liberal.ie, but it was talking about that like because he's trained in law and he's got a PhD in philosophy, like he's kind of well read into the law and all that kind of stuff, and he's written up a component of this hate crime, hate speech legislation stuff. And if that goes through, well, I mean, does McGurk think that by being the reasonable centrist or whatever, that he's going to be okay? Like, if this stuff is drawn up, like there is no kind of there is no center anymore. You're either on board or you're not on board. And McGurk is, I mean, I see McGurk quoted as being far right. I saw someone quote McGurk as a far right Nazi before. You know, it's going to come for him as well. You know.
Yeah, it seems to me that he's obviously some kind of court jester to be the conservative. Like, no offense, and I usually don't throw shade, but David Quinn's and people like that, when I see them put up their articles in the Independent and stuff, it's like, for one, I know, and sorry, David Quinn, if you're listening, you're probably not. I'm sorry, no offense, but it's just what I believe. If you're allowed to be in the Irish Independent, there's probably something wrong with you to start with, to regularly post columns, right? And I see it again and again. It's like, it's such strange stuff. Like, it's this watered down, cooked out version of like our point of view, but it's designed to be so subversive in its own way. Like, granting all the premises of the left, but then having a slight issue with it because I'm the conservative guy who's the kind of unlikable one. And it's so, to me, it's so Punch and Judy-esque like that. It actually makes me sick. You know what I mean?
But it is a cliche of the first that came for the whoever, and it's just a case of them nearly buying time, and it's not benefiting anything. Like, it's not going to have. There is no big plan from McGurk or from whoever. They have no idea what to do. They're just like bits, like as the Chinese say, they're just kelp on the sea. Like, they're just floating through this. Like, whereas, whenever people actually have a plan, all they can do is critique it. And, there is a place for that. Like, as we were saying at the start, like, there is a benefit to that it can kind of temper us a little bit. But at the same time, whenever someone's acting, like, say, as a gatekeeper kind of figure, like, eventually you just have to bust through and just say, here, look, we're here now. Like, and we are getting there, like, as the new nationalist primetime episode kind of started to show, like, because we are getting to a stage where we cannot be ignored by the political establishment. Like 56% of people in the country in the Red Sea poll, they're the last one, said that we have too many, or we shouldn't be taking any more refugees into the country.
Yeah,
like we have the political wind behind us. And it's up to us now to hammer that home. And YouTube has, its place and all that, but as last true Gael said, logistics, like on the ground, getting active in communities, telling people, going up to people and just saying to them, like, look, this is awful what's happening here. Obviously do it in a kind of a bit of a suave way, like, but get it done, like, because like we're what, 6 months off the last election. We have no idea how long this government could last, like, and we have to make every day count, like getting more votes, more people even knowing what we're about, like, and hoping that whenever they get into that ballot box that they're going to give us a number, like, and that's the sad reality of a popularity contest we call democracy, like, So
exactly, and this is even just to back up that point, like things are starting to speed up very, very, very quickly. So we need to speed up very, very quickly as well. Now, I mean, the good news is that like especially even with that new nationalist documentary, like I've kind of noticed even among kind of, people I know offline, online, real life, all that kind of stuff, that people are kind of more amenable to, what's going on. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, things are speeding up very, very quickly, basically.
Yeah, part of me is like, democracy wise, I don't know, you have to remain engaged with democracy and votes and all that. But part of me, maybe it's black pill, I don't know, feels like, this is going to come to more. I kind of have more of a march on Dublin type of vision in my mind, of like the country at some point just snapping and getting a movement going and marching 100,000 people up to Dublin type of thing. Or like, as preposterous as that sounds, it almost sounds less preposterous to me than getting like a majority in the government or anything like it in any time within the next 100 years, maybe 500 years. It's like it's not blackpilling. It's good to still try, but part of me, the idea of popular nationalist populism, like on the ground street populism or something, at some point seems like I find it hard to envision democracy. Now, Gael, you wanted to come in there. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I think you're right. Like, but the thing is that like the phrase that politics is downstream of culture is important there. And whenever you take, like, say, Sinn Féin as an example, and how they went from what you were saying, the March on Dublin, to the place where they are today, like, and it was high energy, constant picking away at the establishment. We are, like, they were claiming that they were the change, like, and that was always the way. Like, how many times have you heard school kids, like, shouting, like, oh, up the right, even half joking? But the thing is that they're growing up with this image in their head that they've created themselves, this romantic vision of what Sinn Féin and the IRA is, like, and it's revolution, like, and now you have all these, like, maybe not quite anti-fa, but leaning towards that way, the younger generation looking towards that. And like, even like, whenever you think of the aesthetic, and like, there's a, like, I think this, it will have to be addressed at some stage, as the aesthetic of our movement, like, is that, like, if you think back to what, I don't know how to pronounce this, Aldrin Ash, right, or whatever you call them, the party in the 1930s in this country. Like, yeah. I believe it was one of their members that designed the new capital, Tara, and the monuments, like, to the War of Independence and all that. And like, that is a strong aesthetic, like, but we went for the like say Sinn Féin, like, they went for the kind of more militant type side of things, like, because obviously that's where they were growing out of. But as things progress, it will, like, it's nearly like our politics will feed a culture and aesthetic, and then that will feed back into the loop, and that's where, like, say the Zoomer generation or whatever is going to pick up this energy again, like, and it's about us. It's like like, it's the image of the phoenix or whatever that Sinn Féin used. That's what it was. Like, the old generation are gone. This is what we've handed on to the next one, but obviously things are speeding up as well, like, so it's a constant thing, especially with constant information flow happening these days, so it's just a kind of another aspect that has to be, maybe it's not right now, it has to be thought about, but if we're doing this for even 5-10 years, like, it has to be thought about, like, I think, anyway.
The other thing with that too is that, like, even if you take a look at even if you take just kind of a rough proxy for kind of nationalism, So if you take a look at maybe the past few referendums, if you take a look at the abortion, if you take a look at Peter Casey, if you take a look at even the blasphemy, and the blasphemy one is actually interesting because no one gave a crap about it. But one thing, if you kind of broke down the results, 30% voted against it kind of anyway. So I think as of now, there's about 20 to 30% of people who basically are kind of into us no matter what, really. Because there is you can see it from kind of previous referendums a bit, and the presidential election, that like there is a kind of an anti-establishment chunk of the population, and I think at the very least, if you were able to get that message across, like this could flip. Like I agree with you. Like we're getting to the stage where kind of more, you might need 100,000 people, or you will need 100,000 people marching in Dublin, kind of thing. But at the same time, like there's a lot of people that can flip, and things can change very, very quickly. And even in terms of past elections, past votes, whether it's back in 1916, 1918 for us, or whether it's something as simple as I don't know. I'll pick an example. Vox, right? Vox in Spain. I think, I don't know, someone can correct me in the chat, but they went from like 0.25% to 15% in about 3 or 4 years. Like things can change very, very quickly. Basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, Vox are a perfect example of that. Actually, they are a massive white pill in their own way in that regard, because they did shoot up out of nowhere and they're doing really, really well. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of things can happen at once. I'm not despairing on democracy, but like, just I wouldn't, I suppose it's like running many things at once. Like I wouldn't depend on it. I wouldn't say like, oh, hopefully now someone just gets voted in 10 years and we'll be grand. It's like, that would be obviously a big mistake, because it's about the daily grind as well, and that kind of activism and various things like that. Even simple things like flyers. I have personal experience that flyers can have a big impact. Well-sourced flyers. It's such a simple thing, printing things out on paper and handing them to people. But a thing like that could be massive at a strategic time when there's a particular issue going on, and you take the initiative with that, and you kind of like, what's the word? I want to be careful with my words now. I'll be the way they're listening, right? I don't want to say it ignites a certain type of passion. It's because it energizes people. Big, like in terms of media focus, if you put a flyer into a town that is, let's say, having a lot of immigration, and people see it and they get interested by it, and they're like, "Wow, these facts are true. I've looked them up. They're real. I've sourced them." Then the media react to it like crazy, and next thing you have this whole thing going on. Like I'm convinced that in places like Electoral, if a National Party person or whoever came swinging by there in the future, a Chad candidate in that area, who's very, like Chad fireman type of vibe, kind of cool, reliable, strong, kind of like friendly person, very presentable, but with the ideology. And they were National Party. A place like Electoral and all the surrounding villages, for basically a big chunk of Galway would be like, they have previous trauma, and they're able to go, okay, yeah, we remember that. That's literally one of the biggest historical events in this region. Something like Electoral, they won't forget that anytime soon. So you could have things like that work for you. But again, a lot of that stuff can start with a flyer, something as simple as that, by just communicating to people. It's massive, and that's what I would advise the parties to do as well. Anytime an issue comes up, jump on it, and it's what the NGOs would be like. They're taking advantage of it. They're trying to steer the narrative. It's like, damn fucking right, you should be trying to do that, at a local level through people, any opportunity whatsoever. So
exactly.
that stuff is always there to do,
Yeah, exactly. And even if you come even one of the, I don't know, personally, I kind of think like, just back from the election, is that like one of the big things is that like, people want to, people use kind of politics or voting as kind of a, kind of talk to someone down the pub, or, I mean, to some degree, or even like just to fit in with the community or get the community going. And one of the ideas, or one of the things we can do, is you can make something, or you can make a party more acceptable by simply just getting the fact that everyone knows about it. So any kind of way that we can get any kind of free publicity that makes us look good, but at the same time can make the media kind of melt down is perfect. I mean, I'll give just kind of, sorry to interrupt, but I'll just give two quick examples there. So like, the first one was that lad flying the plane, White Lives Matter, over Burnley. Like, that's, like, anyone would agree that like 95% of people would say White Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter, or whatever. They do matter. Everyone's life matters. But then they go on the BBC, or they go on the read a paper or the Guardian or whatever, and then those lads are talking like, oh, these are evil racist statements, and then that alienates people from the normal media, and that gets people into other kinds of media. So if you can turn these people, or make these people work for you, I think that's something we can go for. Even something like, I mean, that's actually one thing that I think the National Party have been very, very good at. Like if you go on their Twitter, like, they have all these kind of pictures or banners of Ireland for the Irish. I mean, Ireland for the Irish is the most, in a sense, it's the most boring, uncontroversial thing you can say. I mean, of course, Ireland should be for the Irish. Of course, Japan should be for Japanese people. Of course, Somalia should be for Somali people. You know what I mean. But when it's done and said in that way, it makes kind of Irish Times journalist types freak out. It gets you more free publicity. Normal people look at that, they kind of go, what the hell? More people know about it in the first place, and that makes it more acceptable to talk about, and it just kind of gathers momentum from there. It's exponential in a sense.
Yeah, just what Gael was saying about the like, say in Electoral, like some young fella that is able to handle himself in a debate, like, just running for whoever in the area, like that. I've been saying this, like, is that the county councils are going to be more important to us to judge where we are realistically than the Dáil elections, like, because the Dáil elections, like, obviously with the money involved and the distances required, all that kind of crack, we're at a major disadvantage straight off the bat, like. And although, yeah, like, the reward is bigger, but on say, like, the county council elections will be coming in, what, about 4 years now. And if we're able to stand, like, we should be aiming to stand a candidate in every local electoral area across the country. That's about 120, was it 127? Like, we should be aiming for that, like. And if that's the real test, like, because all politics is local. If you have a county councillor, or even, like, say now, as an example, Sligo has 3 LEAs, Leitrim has 3 LEAs, and Donegal has 7 LEAs, right? So in the northwest, right, you're talking 13 people. Like, we should be able to get 13 people that agree with these policies to stand. Like I can't see any reason that we wouldn't. And that is what launches us from what it is right now, like maybe before last election, what it was, into mainstream. Like, that'd be my measuring tape, like, by which I'd measure the movement, like,
Yeah, exactly,
yeah. It's like, if you could get 13 people up there to agree with the message, I would have no doubt that there's far more. There's 1,300 or 13,000 people up there who agree with the message, fully. But are they willing to engage in the risk to their livelihoods and that kind of stuff? That's the problem. It's not actually about how many are there, as I'm sure you know. It's that thing of, that's the hard part, is for people to step over that mark in a way that's a little bit of a challenge, beyond even the ideas or logistics.
It definitely is a challenge, like, but the thing is like that there is people that are saying, like, you know, I'm thinking about it, like I'm probably going to do it. Like, even if it's just put the name on the ballot and have an option there, like, you know, and they can go on whatever, their local radio, plead their case for, you know, even if they only get 20 minutes airtime or whatever, plead their case and just do it. Like, because at the end of the day, like, what are we looking at if we're just going to sit back? You know, why are we bothering at all? Like, you know, and it's just a case of balance. Like, what do you think? Like, is it worth more to you to have nobody to vote for in your area, and maybe you having to put in long hours, maybe putting in 18-hour days for a couple of weeks, like to try and get your message out there, to get as much support as you can? Or is it better for you just to, you know, take the evenings off, you know, flick around the internet, tweet a bit of stuff, and just kind of hope other people pick up the slack, like, you know? And young fellas and young women are coming to the fore now, like, you know, and they'll be the guys, like the ones that's in college now, they're going to be the ones that will be the electable candidates in this movement, like the most electable candidates. They're new blood. They're not tainted by being ex-Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael or whatever. They're new. They're brand new, and people want that, like. And that's the beautiful thing of it, like, you know. So hopefully, if we can get the structure in place, have a support that we can move around the country and operate efficiently, like, there's no reason that we shouldn't be able to get, you know, 120 odd people to stand in an election. Like, we're working on it already, like, you know, and it's already starting to, it's looking good, like, you know. But it's just a case of every day work at it, like.
Exactly. And even just to add kind of 2 points onto that, you know, it's kind of like you were saying before, like, you know, if that one person stands up, then that gives every other person in the group who might have otherwise not have the kind of confidence to say, I'm going to do something about it, to actually speak up and put themselves out there and do something about it. And then the second thing is that once that kind of builds up over time, especially with the younger crowd, like you were talking about, Gar, the thing is, like, you know, think of politics, or think of people like who are going towards political positions or trying to become TDs as a sort of a distribution, because, you know, only a certain percentage of people are going to make good politicians in terms of like personality, in terms of intelligence, in terms of commitment. You know, there's a certain personality type which is more suited to be a politician. I mean, I'd make a terrible politician, for example. But the bigger the sample of people, the bigger that you're going to get that really, really good guy. And then the higher that gets, the more that you're going to get these people into these positions. And then the effect just keeps kind of increasing. So, I mean, I've even kind of said it before, like, even if you have like you know, like kind of a YouTube thing or a Twitter thing kind of talking about this kind of stuff, that's fantastic, because it builds up everyone's confidence, and it builds up everyone's ability to kind of talk about this stuff. And then you get the kind of really good guy, the really good outlier. And that's even more when things start accelerating forward in your favor.
Yeah, it's like that it's worth mentioning as well that, like, I can sit here and kind of like wax lyrical about, you know, oh, I don't know about democracy, and I don't know if parties do this and that and the other, but, you know, it's easy to talk, and like a lot of these parties, you know, you name them, are putting in work consistently, logistical work and stuff like that. So credit where it's due, and I completely understand that. The other thing as well, I would say, is like, insofar as my little effort and yours, you know, some of the media and the online stuff and the kind of streaming and events, the odd, you know, demo and you know, that kind of stuff we do, is like, my only hope for that is that there is some person there, kind of a chosen one type of thing. There's a guy who's like very charismatic, you know, very driven, intelligent, all that stuff, who maybe listens to this a little bit once in a while, and as they develop, it's something that's there for them, you know, in the way that, like, there's an online dissident rights sphere internationally. It's kind of like, just so it's not, my goal in doing this kind of stuff was always like, you know, I know this exists internationally, I listen to it myself, but it shouldn't be that, like, you're either listening to RTE or you're listening to an American podcast. There should just be in between stuff, you know. And I think that's one thing that just people in general, the Gran Torinos and all that, have done great in the last couple of years that we didn't have before. And it's a massive thing to be pleased about, I think, is this kind of online sphere. It's one of the biggest things in the right in Ireland. It's not enough It's not enough by any means, but it's an important part, and at least it's there. Because I remember, maybe 3 years ago, it like didn't exist. There was no Gran Torino, there was no whoever, there was none of it. I used to look at like Canada. Canada had like, all of this different media and YouTubers and personalities and stuff. And I was going, they're not that much bigger than Ireland. There's literally no one in Ireland. I haven't heard of anyone. And now we do. Now those people are there. So that's kind of good. Like in a way, there's a white pill there to just think, you know what, a couple of years ago, there basically wasn't a national party. I don't know if there was an IFP. There were no YouTubers, no streamers, no Burkean, no journalists, no thinkers. The ideas weren't half as developed, stuff like that. So I think we are actually in a pretty good place overall when you zoom out. I don't know if you disagree with me there, Wise.
I'm not talking down about like, the work that's been done, like, and I'm not saying everybody should be standing for an election, but I'm saying like that in a group of, say, an LEA of whatever, 5,000 people, we should be able to get one candidate. Like, that's the work that's been put out, like, has been phenomenal. Like, because I grew up listening to, American stuff, as you said, like, because there was nothing here. Like it was either dissident Republicans you were listening to, or some radio chat show host in America that was kind of like, and neither of them were on the money, like, But now we're getting that, like, when it's building all the time, like, and there's more people, and it's great to see, like, But I wasn't talking down about the effort that's been put in. It's been absolutely Herculean, like, So I just sort of jump in and say that, like.
No, it's a good basis though. It's a basis, and it doesn't mean anything by itself. It does need that stuff of people running and like, highly driven people who do long days and all of that kind of stuff. Maybe I'll do it myself in time. This kind of whole thing of political stuff, but like it is important and needs to build onto it. But I just think the last couple of years is a good bedrock. Like it doesn't come up out of nowhere. But now we have the soil, we have the seeds. It's just time for like some people to kind of rise up, metaphorically speaking, or whatever, within reason and all. I'm always thinking of NGOs, and I'm like, I say perfectly ordinary things, and then I think of NGOs. I'm like, they're going to be quoting me, calling me fucking, Osama bin Laden here because I said something with that. Like, it's so stupid. But you go on last year, Gael, you were saying?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to briefly put in a point that Critiqued and Chopper were on a stream, and Chopper talked about the fact that like, and he's completely correct, and it is kind of a bit of a confidence boost that like, Chopper's talking about the fact that like, we haven't seen the best or the most influential people yet, because they're either kind of like completely apolitical or apathetic or whatever. But there's a lot of good people that are coming down the line, and we just simply don't know about them yet. And that's just something to keep aware of, basically. Yeah,
we definitely have a kind of a Neo Matrix kind of type scenario there going on, like where someone's. I do think at some, the whole thing of great men. I do like, and there are some great men in our movement and stuff. But I do feel like at some point, someone who's got everything in one package will kind of come along and be dynamic and that kind of stuff. Because again, it's not like there's no point depending on elections alone. There's no point depending on media sphere, like some of the stuff we're doing. There's no point depending on that alone. And I agree, there's no point depending on the idea of a great person. There's no point depending on that alone. But that happening would be fantastic. And that's no insult to anyone who exists right now. But someone like that will come along and have this kind of like one man whirlwind energy type of thing, and will have absorbed some of our ideas along the way. That'll be cool. And it will happen. That 100% will happen as well.
Yeah, and it goes back to the like politics is downstream of culture thing too, like, and it feeding back into the loop, and like you think about, like, I always kind of compare, like, I probably shouldn't, but I kind of compare this to Sinn Féin, the Sinn Féin movement, like, that'll be my, as they say, political gene pool or whatever. But they, like, whenever you think back to, like, say, just before the peace process in Northern Ireland, like, they had absolutely nothing. Like, they were on whatever, less than 1% of the vote too, like, and then suddenly Cuivan O'Quailon came out of Cavan, and that's whenever you've seen the Pierce Doherty and the likes of Matt Carthy rising up through Sinn Féin. Once they had someone there, like, the Sinn Féin changed completely. Obviously, they went away mental on the global homo, like, but at the end of the day, it's like it's that one person, and it can be the most inconspicuous of people that you would never think, like Cuivi O'Quailon, you know, basically leading Sinn Féin to where they are today, you know, as a building block.
Can I jump in there, because you're more of a Nordy, right? Obviously, than me. I'm Cork, so I'm a lot of politics from the north, be it the Troubles, the IRA, the Sinn Féin, that whole world. I'm not that well read on things, and I'm not maybe old enough. I don't know. And the main thing is that I just wasn't around then. I was too young, and I was geographically far away. So it's actually kind of foreign to me a little bit, some of that stuff. This Cuivín O'Quailon, can you just repeat that for me? What era was that? Like, as in what year was that? And you were saying Sinn Féin were on, basically educate me from scratch here on this. They were on, Sinn Féin were in the woods. Are you saying that they were irrelevant?
Yeah, they were wiped out, like, completely. Like, there was
when was this?
Cuivín O'Quailon was elected in, I think, 2002.
Okay.
Before that, Sinn Féin were well below 2%. Like, you know, they were getting like, even they had a bump around the time of the peace process up to about, I think, like 4 or 5%, something like that, in the south I'm talking about. And like, before that, in the south, they were getting less than 1%, maybe 2%, stuff like that, like very bad results, like, you know, consistently all the time. But they got their foot in the door with Cuivín O'Quailon, and Cuivín O'Quailon, and, you know, respect to him, he was a great speaker. Like, I think he stood down in the last election. But yeah, like, that's all it takes. Like, you know, that's, like, you can even see, like, the photograph is still there. And this would have been the time whenever I started getting active in politics. Like, it was probably just a year or two after that. I was old enough to kind of start sitting in, listening to meetings and stuff like that, you know. But it was Pierce Doherty and Matt Carty. Like, the photograph is there of them celebrating Cuivín O'Quailon getting elected. They're hanging out the windows of cars with tricolours, like the two of them in the car together, which is pretty cool, really. Like, you know. But that's where Sinn Féin came from. Like, you know, that they had nothing. Like our area up here, like, just on the border with Donegal, like, there was whenever I was younger, the older members, like, they were nearly revered, like, because they were, in a way, they were kind of like ourselves, because they were the people that was knocking on doors and getting spat at and chased off the street. Like, you know, that's how they were treated back in them days. Like, and maybe we're not far off that, really. You know,
that's very interesting.
Like, I can see a lot of parallels. Like, you know, it's.
But like, they were getting spat at and all that. This is in let's say the 90s. I don't know, am I just ignorant here? But like, this was in the border area, in Catholic kind of, like, what would you call it, Republican areas.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of, like, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, like, just hated the site. Like, if you were, well, like, you know, like, Sinn Féin, there were only 1 in 100 people, if even, like, you know, and it was families. Like, Civil War politics never really ended, like, in this part of the country anyway. Like, I was down next year part of the country for a while, and I thought it's like a different country, like, because there's no orange order, nationalist divide or anything like that. You know, everyone's just kind of a citizen, and it's this. I found it very strange to kind of be slotted into that. You know, like, I used to laugh to myself about it. Like.
It's so different. It's so different because, again, raised in Cork City basically, and which, you know, it has its own Republican history further back and stuff, but more recently it was kind of untouched. At least Dublin, unfortunately, had the Dublin Monaghan bombings and all that. Cork, as I'm aware, it hadn't much of that, unless you were really into it. The average person didn't know much about it or feel. Even now, yeah, when you're in the north, around the border regions on the, you know, nominally, like, Republic of Ireland side or the southern side, I don't know. People will give out to me for the language I'm using here, but even in Cavan North, is it North Leitrim? It's a kind of a wild country. There's a different vibe. You can feel it speaking to you from the land, from the people. It's a different breed. And yeah, it is. There's a lot to learn from that dissident politics. Even when I look at someone like Bobby Sands, if you look up his for anyone in the audience, I'm sure you know, his writings. Because we all hear about Bobby Sands and all that, but I only recently took the time to kind of look into him a little bit more. And just something as simple as Google Bobby Sands writings, and there's a website that lists his writings under the title writings. You can read all the stuff he wrote in prison. just to get a sense of the dissident world they were living in. There is a lot to draw on, I think, in the Republican Irish tradition. And look at Sinn Féin now. Just hopefully we don't turn globo homo, in order to do it the same way.
But this is the thing, like, I was talking about that statue that got defaced, like, and it was a Donegal fella's name that got painted over on that, like, and I was chatting to a fella that was he was in Long Cash before it was the H blocks, it was the sheds back then, like, and it was he realised that Sinn Féin think Bobby Sands died for gay rights, and he was like, "What?" Like, he was livid about it. Like, he was like, nobody mentioned that the entire time. Like, that was his exact words. Like, nobody mentioned that the entire time that he was like, he was there for two years. Like, and that's like, it's just a rewritten history that Sinn Féin have adopted in a kind of in a typical leftist fashion. Like, that they have become these saviors of all these different disparate minorities. Like, it's the Saul Alinsky tactic. Like, that's all that is. Like, they used the shell of Sinn Féin in order to build this liberal left-wing party, and it's so plain to see.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well with Sinn Féin and the whole history there is that, people always talk about like Sinn Féin up until depending on who you ask, someone will tell you, oh, Sinn Féin went Marxist in the 70s, they were infiltrated and this or that, or some people will say the 80s, the 90s, the 60s, whatever, at some point they became this kind of very Marxist thing. And yet when you look at the history, speaking of the statue, Sean Russell and some others, and I can never pronounce it, Altieri Hershig or whatever, right? This kind of movement during the World War II and before it, and we don't want to get spicy or in trouble or any of that stuff, but I was surprised to learn only recently when the Sean Russell statue came up, there was you could say it was a practical alliance with the German regime then, but there actually was a kind of a third positionist. It wasn't joint at the hip to German national that, but like in the same way as you had the Argentinian third positionism and kind of syndicalism and all that kind of stuff, that whole world during the interwar period, that was very, very strong in Sinn Féin. I thought it was just one exception because I didn't know anything. I'll be honest with you, up until a few weeks ago, I wasn't even fully sure about Sean Russell, my own ignorance. And I learned about it and I go, no, it wasn't one guy. It wasn't one person, one exceptional thing. It was actually shot through in the movement. Sean Russell couldn't have been the leader of the IRA with the position he had, the S-plan in England and stuff like that. They couldn't have had those beliefs separate. You couldn't be the leader of the IRA and yet have the IRA base of the populace completely in conflict with the leader's point of view. Obviously not. Obviously it was mainstream, and that's shocking to learn. The journey the Ra and Sinn Féin and that kind of whole thing has been through in that context. It's mad.
I'm literally just flicking through a book right now. It's called Exiled by Thomas Anthony McNulty. Right, he was an IRA prisoner in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Like, he was in and out of jail constantly, like fighting for the IRA. And I'm looking for a quote here. But he said, he talks about when leftism started taking hold in IRA in the jail cells. Like, it was the likes of Martin McGuinness and all them boys that they were arguing ideology in the jail cells. And like, even Thomas Anthony McNulty, like, he's saying in the book, I met him, I've chatting to him myself, like, I was chatting to him about this stuff. And he was even, like, he was saying, like, it's written in the book here, I'm buying time trying to find the quote, but there was right wingers. He goes, there was communist, leftists, centrists, and even a couple of right wingers. Like, whenever he was in jail, like, the idea that it was some monolithic left wing paramilitary is stupid flat out. Like, it just didn't happen that way. Like,
yeah, it's the way I see it is maybe it was a practical thing, in the same way as. Like, as well as whatever ideology they had in the 40s and 30s, an element of it outside of ideology was just, the whole cliche of like Britain's difficulty is our opportunity and all that. So aligning with the Axis powers. But there's also, maybe the question then is like, well, after the war, the third position went away and suddenly you're back to it's either the West British, like British American, Anglo-American world, or you have the Soviet Union, which is the other one. So it's just convenient to ally to them. So as much as it being an ideological thing of some leftists in, you know, the milieu. There was also probably just a geopolitical thing of like the Soviet Union can fund us, they can give us help. You know, the alliance with the Gaddafis and the revolutionary movements around the world backed by the Soviet Union. That's part of it as well. And then the third part of it, I think, as well, is that so we've talked about the third position. Now I've talked about the second position, the communists, and why they might have practically and ideologically aligned with them. And then the kind of, what would you call it, the first position, the liberalism, the liberal globo homo gayplex, even back in the 80s and stuff, obviously steered the likes of McGuinness and stuff. You could talk about MI5 and all that, but there was obviously some steering. Like Sinn Féin didn't get to be the way it is now by itself because they were just diehard ideologues. There were greater powers there nudging them, you know, obviously to end up here. But last Gael, you were gonna speak there, sorry.
No, I am. This is not a compared to the 2E. This isn't a topic I'm not as well read up on. But I remember just kind of skimming through Ed Maloney's book, The Secret History of the IRA, and he was talking about the fact that like a lot of these kind of, you know, for lack of a better phrase, kind of, well, thinkers like Foucault and a lot of those kind of French guys, someone of Lacan would be another one. They had Derrida, they had a big influence on Gerry Adams apparently, and it's just kind of interesting to see that kind of how that kind of seeped in, because you know it's I think it's kind of an interesting way, or it's kind of something I kind of think about, or well, it's an interesting topic to me, like how organizations get converged on, you know, like how is it that you set up a business and then suddenly that business ends up stops or is less interested in making a profit, and then goes towards more kind of, you know, we're celebrating LGBT month and we elevate, you know, diversity and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's a particular process and pattern, and it depends on the people who get into your organization that does that. So I'd be interested to hear kind of Gower talking about that, like you know, when you were talking about like Cuivine or Quaylon being elected in 2002, and actually just as a very quick digression here, Sinn Féin in 1988 actually got less votes as a percentage than the nationalist parties did in the last election.
Wow.
So that just kind of keep in mind that, like, you know, when people are going to go, oh, he only got like 5 votes in the first election, you know, that's not the best metric to kind of use, because, you know, like I was kind of saying before, things can speed up very, very quickly. But I was just kind of going to ask Gower there, like, do you kind of know, or do you have any opinion on kind of like that Sinn Féin kind of convergence? That, like, I mean, you were kind of talking about there, like Martin McGuinness and all that, but like, kind of a point whereby, like, you know, the organization started getting full up by, because I mean, even John Waters had an interesting theory that, like, actually, John Waters actually had a great theory, or a fascinating theory on this. He said that, like, the reason that happened to Sinn Féin is that, simply put, all the men were arrested, and more women started taking positions in terms of like kind of middle ranks and kind of lower middle ranks, and because women tend to be on average more, you know, left, kind of more go along to get along. That's how the organization started going more left wing in the long run.
Yeah, the thing is coming them on, like, if you look back through the history of it, it was tightly linked with Sinn Féin. The leader of Sinn Féin, I think back in the 40s and 50s, was a woman, and she was definitely, she would not agree with Sinn Féin today. Like, you know, they are two different beasts altogether. Like, I forget her name now. She she's worth looking into. Look up to the, if anyone's listening and it's interested, the Sinn Féin leadership in the 50s or 40s and 50s. There was a woman that led it, and she was an absolute hero. Like, you know, she was hardline. You know, she was hardline nationalist. But just before I answer you last week, I found the quote here. It's like, this is from Thomas Anthony McNulty. Like, this is an IRA man, right? He wrote it down. So I realised that while we were all IRA men, our political views were often very different, from real lefties to men who would have had very middle-of-the-road views, to some right-wingers, took these debates in the cells, sometimes nearly to blows. Like, he goes on about the difference in the actual movement back in the 70s and 60s, 70s and 80s, like, and the winning out of the Liberals in the jail cells, because who has the influence? It's the fella that's exalted because he's after doing 12 years, like, for fighting for his country. That's like Jerry Adams, only all them boys, they only fucking piggybacked off that, like, you know. They were seen as the rock star peacemakers, like, you know, but in reality, like, they weren't the guys that, you know, physically made the history, like, made things happen, you know. But that'd be my view on it. Like, I have a very different view on how the struggle went in Northern Ireland compared to what you'd read in, like, the Irish Times, or even that book, Secret History of the IRA. Like, I remember I bought that book whenever I was I must have been 12 or 13 or something at the time. And I thought, oh yeah, deadly, a class book about the IRA. You know, I'll read up and I'll know more than, you know, all my family about it. But the thing was, is like, I remember I sat down to read it one day, and it was sitting on the kitchen table or whatever, and a fella that was actually fighting back in the 70s, like, he came in, like, and he was like, "Get that off the table. That's nothing but a load of lies." Like, you know, so it's like, you know, like, I listened, like, and like, in fairness, like, I sat and listened to your man, and I have listened to him often. Like, you know, he'd often be around, like, saying what happened, and it's nearly always at odds, and he has no benefit. Like, he'll admit when something went wrong, when someone died when they didn't need that, whatever. But yeah, like, you know, but it's truth. Like, I'm getting it from the horse's mouth, like, you know. Whereas anything you're nearly reading is doctored to suit an agenda. Like, you know, it's unbelievable. Like, I think that's why Donegal votes against nearly anything the government does. Like, you know, referendums, because they're sick of being lied to for the last 50 years plus. Like, you know. I think there's a psychological thing there. Like, nobody in their right mind would start quoting the Irish Times in Donegal. Like,
sure, out of all the counties, I think Donegal has been the most screwed over in terms of, like, links between, like, the other counties, especially in the north. No, or
definitely. Like, Donegal was never an independent county. Like, you know, it was Derry, Tyrone, and Donegal were one thing. That was O'Neill's county, like, Tyrconnell and O'Neill, like, you know, the O'Neills, yeah. Northern O'Neills, like, and that's the way our society was for years. Well, after partition happened, basically what happened was Derry down to a wee sliver around Ballyshannon there, between Ballyshannon and Balleek. Everything west of that, which was wild land, like, there was nothing there. There was barely a tree in that part of the country. Was just a line drawn through it, and you had on one side Omagh, Derry, and Enniskillen, the big towns, the big Protestant nearly towns, like, run by Protestants at least, like, you know, the gerrymandering with votes and all that kind of crack. And then on the other side, you had a hovel called Donegal, like, you know, with no links to nothing, like, you know. And I think that never really left Donegal, like, and it's kind of a case of being browbeaten, but it's a case that very few people would take Dublin's word, you know, at face value anymore, like, which kind of suits me, like, so.
That's interesting. That's fascinating. So basically, the kind of, what would you call it? The Irish side was kind of abandoned by Dublin, basically. While, like, what about let's say the Peninsula, Moville, and that is on just up from Derry? Would that have been kind of absorbed into the northern Derry kind of economic world, I suppose? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you think about it, like, whenever, like, I was just thinking about this before the stream started. There used to be a fella, he used to be down here a lot. His name was Neil T. Blaney. He was in the arms trial, or the arms crisis, you know, the Kevin Boland and Charles Haughey back in the day. Like, he basically, what he done was he commandeered Fianna Fáil in Donegal back in the 70s, back in the early 70s. And he basically, he did take over Fianna Fáil. He created a split in the party, and he created independent Fianna Fáil, and he was a pro-IRA version of Fianna Fáil in Donegal. Like, Donegal politics is absolutely mental. Like, you know, it's. But like, I grew up. I grew up this enigmatic figure of this here big tall fella that used to land around to the house, you know, late at night to talk to the owl book, you know, and that was the Blaney, like, you know, and they were a complete dynasty, like, you know, they weren't liked by everybody by all means, like, but they were extremely powerful. Like, he was the minister for local government, minister for telegraphs. I think he was the minister for agriculture at one stage, which basically made him like the president of Donegal, like, you know, for a period. His children and grandchildren are still in politics now. but they've completely they've been absorbed by Fianna Fáil again. Like, they just didn't have the drive like that their ancestor had, you know. But hopefully, I still think that's a flame up in the centre of the country that could be relit, you know. But
Yeah,
we could talk about
I've,
that for the let's just chat.
I've a story for you there. It's is it Kilmacrennan's in Donegal, isn't it?
Good question. There's a lot of places.
I think it is. I think it is. I was there a couple of years ago there at Kilmacrennan. I think it is, or else I'm thinking of somewhere else. But it's anyway. It's in the heartland of like just rural Donegal, you know, or maybe it's about 20 kilometers, 20, 30 out of Letterkenny. It's a lovely, lovely place. Like, I just wanted to get I think I got an Airbnb or something for a few days just to kind of drive around the place, because I'd never been to Donegal before. I'd known some Donegal people, but I'd never actually been up that far to me. And to me, it was like, in my mind, exotic, because I'd gotten 25 plus years into my life and not actually gone to Donegal, because it's the opposite side of the country to me. And one of the big things for me in Donegal is the accent, you know, not to flatter you there or anything, but like, you know, the accent is lovely. Male, female, whatever, just that kind of, that, you know, that female Donegal accent is lovely. And then that rough kind of the lad's voice, the various, you know, there's such character to it, right? Love it. And that was my big thing anyway. I'm driving up in the car and I'm saying, come here, I can't wait to get here now. And like when you go to any place with a standout accent, you know, first, like if you, you know, say you fly to Italy, you want to get to the shop and speak to an Italian, you know, there's that excitement, you know. And I'm thinking that with Donegal, I'm going, I can't wait to get up now, get out of the car, walk in and hear a fine Donegal accent straight from the horse's mouth. And drove and decided not to stop, and eventually said, we'll get right to the gaff, to the place we're going to, and wait till the last minute. And I go, I am just going to go into the shop here and get you know, kindling or a bottle of water or something, petrol maybe. So I stop into the petrol station, fill up the car, let's say, and then close the petrol door, and then walk on into the shop, swagger, getting ready to say hello, do the small talk, the banter, very excited now for whoever it'll be, a nice old local. And I walk in and there's some Pakistani fella there.
You're breaking me heart.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, God. The first time I was
I just turned on the camera there.
The first time I was down around Cork, you know, I kind of had to begrudgingly kind of think to myself, it was the first time in my life I ever thought this place might actually be better than Donegal. Like, the only time in my life, like, of all the places I've been.
It's done. You know, Cork's nice out west, I think. It's a big county as well, like kind of like Donegal actually. So it's very different, very diverse. Come here. It's getting late, right? So I want to leave it there basically. But just one point on, you mentioned the female leader of Sinn Féin, and unless I'm mistaken, her name is Margaret Buckley, and she was she was vice president for a few years. I think she was involved in 1916 and everything, and then she became president. So she's steeped in, you know, prestige here, right? And just funnily enough, don't want to go on a conspiracy theory here, but I've never heard of her before. It's kind of strange that actually, you know, maybe she wasn't.
That was a hard.
Maybe she was trad. Maybe she wasn't, you know, into. Maybe she wasn't like, you know, rainbow dildo enough for people to include in the history books type of thing. So I think she'd be an interesting person to look into and explore. Yeah,
the history of Sinn Féin has been completely rewritten. Like they've rewritten themselves into civil rights activists, which they weren't. They were fighting for, like, those people died for Ireland, not for fucking open borders, you know, or gays or anyone. They fought for Ireland, like, and that has been completely rewritten. It's just a marketing ploy, like. That's all it is. It's all Alinsky tactics. Like.
Yeah, but I think it's up to people, yourself, everybody in the chat, whoever, to basically deconstruct that history, to deconstruct what you view as a kind of a fake rewrite of history, to deconstruct and reconstruct it, and to offer that kind of alternative view of history. Something like that is important to do as well, I think. Just as a ending note there, just yeah,
exactly. Like just to briefly interject there, it's something that people don't really talk about, or even the fact that, like, even stuff like, you know, like the consensus about, like, say, Michael D. Higgins, for example, you know, that Michael, if you chase Michael D. Higgins all the way back to the kind of the Labour in the 50s, 60s, 70s, you know, like Eamon Gilmore and Pat Rabbitte were in the student politics all that kind of time. The fact that, like, these guys, like Michael D. Higgins, apparently, you know, like he was a lecturer in sociology, but he used to lecture to his students, Trotskyism. So like he would tell the students, about the rise of communism
I
and
don't know if
how to bring communism into Ireland, that kind of stuff.
that's true, Gael.
Yeah.
LTG, can you just back up 10 seconds there? Because I lost you, and I don't know if everybody else did. You were saying just before you said communism, he was just back up 15 seconds for me because I want to know what you said. Basically.
Oh yeah. Sorry, yeah. So like it's like what Gower was saying there, like the fact that like all these histories have been rewritten. Like even if you go back to like Labour in the Michael D, like Michael D was a Trotskyite. Like Michael D used to lecture in sociology in NUIG, and he used to apparently used to walk around campus wearing a dressed in kind of like wearing a big fucking furry Russian hat, and he used to talk about trying to get his students to kind of bring the revolution in and all that kind of stuff. Like an actual full blown like major communist, like, and people just see the guy as like, oh, he's the guy who's the president and he has the dogs and he's lovable and all that kind of. Exactly, yeah. Or like Pat Rabbit and Eamon Gilmore, like that their origins or their backgrounds are full blown kind of like we'll have the kind of dictatorship threshold or whatever, and then you can move into your your stateless communist society, all that kind of stuff. Like it's very kind of interesting like that. But Sinn Féin and Labour and a lot of these other lads have very, very kind of interesting roots. And sorry for the interjection, but like just to kind of back up Gower, like it's kind of like a lot of this has been completely overwritten, and we need to address that and kind of deconstruct it as well.
Yeah, we should deep dive, deconstruct, and reconstruct Irish history. Full stop.
To do a full circle, like back to where I was at the start, ranting about the aesthetic of the thing. To confuse, say, like post Jerry Adams Sinn Féin with what they were, like, which is us, like Sinn Féin draw a line whenever Jerry Adams, like all that crack happened, like around the Troubles and all. Before that is what we are paying you, in practice, like, and as was it Solzhenitsyn, he said, I think it was him anyway, said the easiest way to destroy people is to destroy their history, and we have to reclaim that, like, and that goes back to the aesthetic, like, and I mean that in a fundamental aesthetic, like a practical aesthetic, not just drawings and pictures, like into the actual the vocabulary that we use as a movement, like to differentiate ourselves from the mainstream, like, or to differentiate ourselves from American Q, whatever, like, is reclaim what is ours, like. So I'm just going to finish on that. That was
return to tradition, or no, but seriously, what you say is that's kind of a thing, but completely. I find it very exciting actually, because I didn't know where we were going with this conversation, but I didn't know that I was going to come away with a new kind of white pill and actually a renewed interest. I almost feel now I'm less inclined for my next stream to come on and talk about maybe whatever, and actually more inclined to delve into things and do what you're talking about there. Anyway, lads, I don't want to ramble and it's late. Thanks everybody for watching, and thanks to the two lads, Last True Gael and Gael. So appreciate it, lads. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Sound out.
All the best. Thanks.
Nice
very
one,
much.
boys. Cheers. So the two lads' YouTubes are linked below, so please do subscribe to the lads. I will talk to you tomorrow, everybody. Thanks for listening. Ihawa. See you.